There are people in a marriage who are always present, even when they are never mentioned. Ghosts that live in the history between two people. Never named, never acknowledged, but always somewhere in the room. Patrick Ryan was one of those people, and on a Sunday night in January, in a hospital waiting room in Hartford, Connecticut. He walked back into the room. My name is Mark Stevens. I am 40 years old, a regional sales director for a medical device company covering the New England territory. I have been married to Ranatata for 8 years. We live in West Hartford in a house with too many rooms and not enough furniture, and a kitchen that she painted a particular shade of green that I thought was going to be a disaster, and turned out to be exactly right. I have driven more miles of New England highway than I could begin to estimate. I know every rest stop on a 91 by the quality of their coffee. I know how to read a room the moment I walk into it. It is the whole skill set of my job, and I am good at it. I did not read this room fast enough. Let me tell you about Ranatata before I tell you about that night, because her history is the whole architecture of this story. Without it, what happened is just a bad evening. With it, it is something that requires understanding rather than just describing. Renata is 38 years old. She grew up in West Hartford, same as me. Different streets, same city, same instinct for which hardware store is better. Before she met me, she was with a man named Patrick Ryan for 4 years. Patrick was her first serious relationship, the kind that leaves a mark, not because it was good, but because it was formative. He was charming and convincing, and over the course of those 4 years, serially unfaithful and emotionally controlling in the particular way of men who need to diminish the person closest to them in order to feel large. He cheated. He lied about it. He apologized. She forgave. He cheated again. The cycle lasted 4 years before she had enough of herself left to end it. She told me all of this within the first 6 months of us dating. She was honest about it completely. She said his name, described what he had done, described what it had cost her. I respected that honesty. I also, if I am being truthful with myself, filed Patrick Ryan away as a man who had hurt her badly enough that he could never be a threat. Because who goes back to the thing that broke them? I have since revised my understanding of that question. We got married in 2016. 8 good years. Or years I believed were good, which is not always the same thing, but is often close enough that you do not feel the distance. Now, January, a Sunday evening. I was on I-91 northbound coming back from a client visit in New Haven that had run 2 hours longer than planned. Winter, dark outside, light snow, the kind of drive where the radio is more company than entertainment. My father's number comes up on the dash. Walter Stevens is 75 years old and spent 33 years teaching at Boley High School in Hartford. He is sharp, dry, constitutionally resistant to admitting discomfort, and has lived alone on Flatbush Avenue since my mother passed 7 years ago. He called to tell me his chest felt heavy and his breathing was off. I told him to call an ambulance immediately. He told me he was not calling an ambulance like some kind of invalid. I told him I would call one for him if he did not do it himself in the next 3 minutes. He called one. Hartford Hospital called me 40 minutes later. Acute pneumonia. He was stable and talking. And by talking, the nurse meant complaining, which I took as confirmation he was going to be fine. But they needed a family member to authorize the full treatment protocol, and no one had come yet. I called Renata immediately. "Babe, my dad's at Hartford Hospital," I said. "Pneumonia. I'm 40 minutes out. Can you get there and sign the authorization form so they don't have to wait for me?" "Of course," she said. "I'll leave right now. Drive carefully. The roads look icy." Thank you. Tell him I'm on my way. I believed her completely. 8 years will do that to you. You stop questioning the unremarkable. What I did not know, what I had no reason to know, was that 15 minutes after she arrived at Hartford Hospital, she walked into the waiting area and came face to face with Patrick Ryan. Patrick's wife, Carol, had been admitted that same evening with a respiratory condition. He was in the waiting area alone, scared in the way that frightened men sometimes look when they no longer have someone to perform composure for. And when Renato walked through those doors, he looked up and recognized her. I want to be fair here, even though fair costs me something. What happened next was not a calculated seduction. It was something more human, and therefore more difficult to dismiss. Two people who had 4 years of history between them, one of them frightened and asking for comfort. In a hospital waiting room at night. Renata had always been the kind of person who responded to someone visibly struggling. It was one of the things I loved about her. Patrick Ryan knew that about her. He had always known how to use it. They talked in the waiting area for a while. She checked on my father, was told he was stable and resting, and came back to the waiting area. Then Patrick said he hadn't eaten all day, and asked if she would sit with him somewhere nearby for an hour, just to have someone familiar while he waited for news. She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. She said yes. They walked to Max downtown on Asylum Street, 2 blocks from the hospital. A real Hartford restaurant, busy even on a Sunday evening. The kind of place that feels warm when the winter is outside. She sat across from the man who had spent 4 years making her feel small. And whatever she told herself about why she was there because some part of her had never entirely left. She called me on the walk to the restaurant. Hey babe, your dad is resting. He looks okay. They say the medication is working. I'm going to grab something to eat nearby and then come back to check on him. Thank you, I said. I'm about 20 minutes out. Take your time. He's fine. I drove north through the snow. I thought about my father. I thought about getting there. I did not think about Patrick Ryan because I had no reason to. I didn't know yet what I was driving toward. I didn't know that. In a warm restaurant 2 blocks from the hospital, my wife was laughing at something a man was saying. A man whose name I knew, whose history with her I knew, and whose presence in her life I had spent 8 years believing was finished. Some things you trust because you have been given no reason not to. And then the reason arrives. Hartford Hospital's emergency entrance opens into fluorescent brightness that is the same at any hour. The specific institutional light of a building that never fully sleeps and never fully wakes. I walked in, gave my father's name, signed the authorization forms that should have been signed an hour earlier. Then I asked the nurse at the desk. Patricia Burns, head nurse, 3rd floor, a woman of 52s, with the measured directness of someone who has delivered difficult information for 3 decades and has learned that the cleanest version is always the kindest. Whether my wife had been here, I showed her the photo on my phone. Renata at a family dinner last summer, laughing at something my father said. Nurse Burns looked at it. Yes, she was here for a while this evening. She left, I would say about an hour ago. She was with a man. A pause. They mentioned getting something to eat nearby. I believe one of them said Max downtown. I stood at that desk and processed what that sentence contained. My wife had been here. She had left. She was at a restaurant 2 blocks away with a man. Thank you, I said. I went upstairs and looked in on my father. Walter was awake. Oxygen cannula in place. IV line. The expression of a man who had been tolerating indignities for several hours and had not run out of opinions about them. He saw me, and something in his face settled. You made it. I made it, I said. How are you feeling? Like I've been poked and measured and asked the same question 6 different times. That means they're being thorough. It means they think I can't remember what I said 10 minutes ago. Can you? He gave me the look he gave his students when they were being imprecise. My lungs are the issue, not my brain. I sat with him for a few minutes, told him I would be back shortly. He told me not to hurry on his account and to bring him something from downstairs that wasn't hospital food. A request I told him I would consider, and that he knew I would fulfill. Then I walked back down out through the entrance and turned left on Seymour Street toward Asylum. Max Downtown is the kind of Hartford restaurant that fills up on Sunday evenings with people who know the food is good and the bar is comfortable. Warm light through the windows, the sound of a room in easy motion. I pushed open the door and stood in the entrance for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. I found them by the window. Renata and Patrick Ryan. A man I had seen only in photographs because Renata had not kept any contact with him after their relationship ended. Or so I had believed. He was 42 years old, well-dressed, leaning slightly forward in the way that men lean when they are working to hold someone's attention. A nearly empty glass in front of him. Renata's hand on the table, not touching his, but close. The easy posture of 2 people who had fallen back into a familiar rhythm without noticing they were doing it. She was laughing when I walked in. I stood there for a moment that felt longer than it was. I am a sales director. I read rooms for a living. I have spent 15 years walking into spaces where I needed to understand the dynamic before I opened my mouth. What I understood in that moment was this. She was not there because she felt obligated. She was there because she wanted to be there. That was the thing that cost the most, not the deception, the wanting. I walked to the table. Patrick saw me first. His posture changed. Not guilt exactly, but the physical recalibration of a person whose advantage has just shifted. He sat back slightly, picked up his glass. Renata turned. The look on her face was not shock. That is what I want you to understand. If it had been shock, I might have read it differently, might have given more weight to the accidental quality of the encounter, to the innocent explanation, to the story she would later tell about running into him and not knowing how to leave. But it was not shock. It was recognition. The look of someone caught not only in a place, but in a feeling. The look of someone who knew in the moment they saw my face exactly what this was and what it meant. I pulled out the empty chair and sat down. A server passed. I asked for a glass of water. Patrick, I said. I looked at the man who had cheated on my wife and broken her and shaped her in ways she had never entirely undone. My father is upstairs at Hartford Hospital with pneumonia. He waited alone for a long time tonight, before anyone from his family came to sit with him. I let that land. Your wife is probably upstairs. 2. Patrick said nothing. He had the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. I looked at Renata. We should talk, I said. Not here. Not tonight. But we will talk. The water arrived. I left it untouched on the table. I stood, put my coat back on, and walked out of Max Downtown onto Asylum Street. The cold hit me, and I stood on the pavement for a moment, the restaurant noise fading behind me. Hartford was doing its winter thing. Quiet, gray, unhurried. Then I walked back to the hospital, went upstairs, sat in the chair beside my father's bed for the rest of the night. Walter looked at me when I came in. He did not ask where I had been or what had happened. He looked at my face and read it with the precision of a man who spent 33 years reading the faces of young people who were trying to hide something. And then he handed me half of the crossword he had been working on. 7 across, he said. 8 letters. Something about trust. I looked at the clue. I wrote in the answer. We did not speak about anything important for the rest of the night. We did the crossword. We listened to the hospital around us. Eventually, Walter slept. I sat in the dark beside my father and thought about the word trust, about how completely I had given it, about what it costs when you discover it was being held in a hand that was reaching for something else. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you. Walter was moved to a regular room on Monday morning. Dr. James Brown, his attending physician, thorough in the way of doctors who explain things twice and mean it both times, told me the pneumonia was responding to treatment, and that with a week of in-hosp care and a careful recovery at home, Walter's prognosis was excellent. He's strong. Dr. Brown told me he's been arguing with the nursing staff about the quality of the oatmeal. I said in this context. Dr. Brown said, "That is an excellent sign." I drove home to West Hartford through the early morning. Streets quiet, the city not yet awake, the particular pale light of a January Monday that makes everything look provisional. I had not slept. I was not tired in the way that produces sleep. I was tired in the way that produces clarity. Renata was in the kitchen when I walked in. She had made coffee. She was standing at the counter with both hands around her mug, the specific posture of someone who has been waiting and has rehearsed the conversation and is no longer certain the rehearsal was adequate. I poured myself a cup, sat down at the table. The kitchen was quiet except for the furnace and the winter birds outside. She started with what I had expected her to start with. "I ran into him," she said. "Patrick. His wife was admitted the same night. He was in the waiting area alone, and he looked, I don't know, lost. And I knew him, and I thought I was just being kind." "Okay," I said. "It wasn't planned. I didn't go there looking for him. It just happened." I looked at my coffee cup for a moment. Then I looked at her. "I have one question," I said, "and I want you to think about it before you answer." She waited. "When you called me from outside the restaurant and told me you were still at the hospital with my father, was that a lie you made because you forgot about him, or because you chose Patrick over him?" The kitchen was very quiet. Renata looked at me, and the thing that happened on her face in the silence that followed was not anger, was not defense, was not the performance of innocence. It was something smaller and more honest. The look of a person confronting a question they already know the answer to and are not yet ready to say aloud. She did not answer. The silence was the answer. I want to talk about something that matters beyond what happened to me, because this story is not just mine. There is a well-documented psychological pattern called trauma bonding, and one of its most painful expressions is the return to a person who caused significant harm. Renata had spent 4 years being diminished by Patrick Ryan. She had done the hard work of leaving him. She had rebuilt herself, met me, built a life that was by any observable measure better and safer and more honest than what she had left. And on a Sunday evening in a hospital waiting room, when he looked at her with the face of someone who needed her, she went. This is not a simple thing to judge. The psychology of it is documented and real. The person who hurt us deeply also knew us deeply. And that knowledge creates a pull that does not simply disappear because we chose to leave. Patrick Ryan had not changed. He had simply found the moment. And Renata, who had done everything right for 8 years, discovered that the wound he left was not as healed as she had believed. If you are in a marriage or a relationship and your partner has a person in their past who caused them serious harm, that history does not simply stop mattering. Have the honest conversation about it. Not as surveillance, not as control, but as the kind of honesty that long partnerships require. The thing you are not discussing is not the same as the thing that is not there. The second thing I want to say is about my father. Walter Stevens spent hours alone in a hospital without a family member present to authorize his treatment because his daughter-in-law was 2 blocks away at a restaurant. In Connecticut, as in most states, leaving a vulnerable adult in a medical emergency without ensuring their care is covered can carry legal weight. I chose not to pursue that avenue because Walter recovered, and because adding legal complexity to an already damaged situation was not going to give me anything I wanted. What I will say is this: if you have a family member in a medical emergency, and you are the person who has agreed to be there, be there. No conversation, no coincidence, no old acquaintance is worth the hour you were not in that room. The third thing is about Patrick Ryan. Several weeks after that Sunday evening, I learned through Phil Garrett, who has a reliable network of Hartford mutual acquaintances, that Carol Ryan had found out what Patrick had done. He had left his admitted wife alone in the hospital for the evening to sit at a restaurant with an old girlfriend. Carol's family found out. The marriage, already fragile, according to those who knew them, did not survive it. Patrick Ryan left one woman alone in a hospital to pursue another woman whose marriage he then helped damage. He is the stone that dropped into 2 families that January evening and sent ripples through both of them. I do not take satisfaction in Carol Ryan's situation. She did nothing wrong. She was in a hospital room alone while her husband was 2 blocks away, which is a specific kind of abandonment that I understood better than most people would. What I take from Patrick Ryan's story is simpler. Some people do not change. They wait for the right moment, find the right vulnerability, and do the same thing they have always done. The best thing Renata ever did was leave him in 2014. The worst thing she did was forget why she had. Walter came home on a Wednesday, 12 days after he was admitted. Beverly, the home health aide I arranged through the hospital's discharge planning service, arrived Thursday morning and had within 48 hours correctly identified the crossword puzzle as the most important variable in Walter's daily well-being and started doing them with him every morning. Walter pretended this was intrusive. He was clearly delighted. I visited on a Saturday morning in February, a few weeks after his discharge. The light was different by then. Not the dead gray of January, but the tentative, provisional light of a Connecticut February that is not yet promising spring, but is at least considering the concept. Walter was at his kitchen table with his crossword and a cup of coffee. I sat across from him. He pushed the coffee toward me. I poured myself a cup from his pot. We sat for a while without speaking. The house on Flatbush Avenue was quiet, in the way it is always quiet now. Not empty, but singular. The particular quiet of a person who has learned to occupy a space that was designed for more. Walter looked at me over the rim of his cup. "You look better," I told him. "I feel better." He set the cup down, looked at me with those 33 years of reading faces. "You don't." "I'm getting there," I said. He nodded once, not dismissively, with the particular weight of a man who has been through things and understands that getting there is its own kind of arriving. "Eventually is good enough," he said. We did the crossword. The morning light moved across the kitchen table. Outside, Flatbush Avenue was quiet and cold and entirely itself. Some things are worth driving through snow for. My father is one of them. I knew that before that Sunday evening. I know it more completely now. After that morning, life didn't suddenly become easier, and it certainly didn't become perfect. Healing never works that way. There were still difficult conversations, Still memories that surfaced without warning. Still days when old regrets seemed louder than new beginnings. But something fundamental had changed. We had stopped pretending that time alone could repair what silence had broken. Instead, we began doing the slower, harder work of showing up for one another. One ordinary day at a time. My father never became a different man overnight, and I never became a son without questions. We simply became two people who finally understood that love isn't measured by flawless histories, but by the willingness to keep choosing each other after the truth has been spoken. The crossword puzzle we finished that morning stayed on his kitchen counter for nearly a week. Every time I visited, he refused to throw it away. "Proof we finished something together," he joked, though I always suspected it meant more than that. It reminded him and me that even when the answers seem impossible at first, patience, honesty, and a little help from someone sitting across the table can fill in every empty square. Months later, another winter storm rolled through Brooklyn. As I watched the snow settle quietly outside my apartment window, my phone buzzed with a simple text from Dad. It read, "Coffee's on if you're around." No dramatic speeches, no emotional confessions, just 6 ordinary words that somehow carried everything neither of us needed to explain anymore. I smiled, grabbed my coat, and headed for the car without thinking twice. Because some invitations aren't really about coffee. They're about being reminded that someone is hoping you'll walk through the door. Looking back now, I realize that families aren't defined by the moments when everything goes right. They're defined by what happens after everything goes wrong. They're built in apologies that arrive late, but sincerely. In forgiveness that asks for nothing in return. In quiet Sunday mornings spent sharing crossword clues instead of old arguments. We spend so much of our lives believing the biggest moments are weddings, funerals, graduations, or holidays. But sometimes the moment that changes everything is much smaller. Sometimes it's an old man sliding a newspaper across a kitchen table and saying, "You want to help me with 17 across?" Sometimes healing begins with nothing more remarkable than staying for another cup of coffee. My father once told me that every winter eventually gives way to spring, even if the people living through February have a hard time believing it. I think he was talking about more than the weather. He was talking about people, about families, about the quiet hope that even relationships frozen by years of misunderstanding can thaw if someone is willing to make the drive. The snow from that Sunday has long since melted. The crossword is probably gone. The coffee cups have been washed and put away. But I still remember the sunlight creeping across that kitchen table, the comfortable silence between us, and the feeling that, for the first time in a very long while, neither of us was trying to outrun the past. We were simply grateful to share the present. And if there's one lesson I've carried with me ever since, it's this: never underestimate the power of one more visit, one more conversation, one more chance to say yes when someone you love asks if you're coming over. Because one day, those ordinary moments become the memories you treasure most. They become the story you tell, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because you finally realized that the greatest journeys don't always take you somewhere new. Sometimes they simply bring you home.